nothing has come close to the time that I stood on an authentic auction block, and that was in Texas. That was Brenham, Texas, Seward Plantation. Um, Believe me, if you were to stand on an authentic auction block, the thing that went through my mind was the fact that historically people stood on this block, their lives was changing. First of all, you gotta bare your back to show that potential buyer that there are not any marks on your back, because a potential buyer does not want to buy that person, because marks on your back is a result of being whipped.
Right.
And to be whipped, that's some type of disciplinary action of that period. That means you're defiant. And that potential buyer does not want to buy a defiant enslaved person to insert amongst his already broken and docile enslaved people.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about that. And you think about the fact that, you are sometimes possibly being sold away from your children.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you're on an auction block, that may have meant that your former owner was a terrible businessman. And being a terrible businessman is insecurity for you as an enslaved person. Not
Mm-hmm.
that there was security being an enslaved person, but still, you're still an individual. You still want that connection to something and some people, and to have that just taken away from you at the will of someone else, that's a lot to endure.
Yeah. What do you say to people who don't want to have anything to do with that say, like, don't want to come to the Vance birthplace, or don't want to learn more about that history per se, or talk about it? How does that make you feel?
I have to tell folks about my aha moment for loving, preserving places. When I was quite young, I went to Amsterdam. I was in the military. I went to Amsterdam, and it's a group visit amongst other airmen like myself. And a part of the package was, going to the place where Anne Frank hid from the Germans. If I was making the choices by myself, I would not have gone there. But because I went there and went into that space and saw where Anne Frank hid from the Germans, it did something to me. It made me recall that time in that high school class when we were studying that. We saw that film. At that very moment in that class, it didn't mean a whole lot to me. But
Right.
Being in that space was different. I finally realized that, there's relevance to this. There's relevance to this space. There's relevance to the space, because now I'm in it. And now I can relate to that time in class. And now I know more now of the conditions, the fact that here's a whole family in this space, having to be quiet at certain times, and intermingling with other families who are in danger just like they are. If they're discovered, their fate would be death. And eventually that was their fate. So internalizing, being there in that space was my aha moment to make me realize that, sadness, bad things, this space represent bad things. But the fact that when they were in this space, they had some serenity, they had some safety, they had some hope. So those spaces, that space at that time became more relevant to me. And that's where I knew that saving places, preserving places was necessary, was a good thing. So that, that was my time when folks tell me about not wanting to come to plantations. I sometimes get to relate that story, but I also relate to them that if they look like me, if they're African American and they make that story to me, I tell them, look here, if you continually deny going to these places, or continually are afraid for whatever reason, historical trauma that's involved with these places. You know, there are a lot of other folks who think just like you, and if we're not in the audience to be represented to whoever's telling that story, or that site that's telling that story, well, then what incentive does that site has to change their narrative?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if indeed that narrative need to be changed. I mean, there's some sites out there that are doing fine. I don't want to paint everybody with one brush, but if they're not doing fine, what incentive would they have to, you know, change that narrative? Well, we're not out there challenging them. No, not in a way that we're going to come in and be so boisterous that we're going to take over their tour. I think that's disrespectful. But there are other means. You can after the fact bring up your point, or you can write, but there's always TripAdvisor and Yelp and all that stuff. I mean, you could call them out like that too, if indeed that's your way of doing things. But compliment them when they're doing the right thing. Let folks know that they're out there doing the right thing, and you would recommend to someone to go and visit that site because at least the experience you had was good. They told the whole story. Now, sometimes, of course, it's the individual interpreter, the presenter. So there are those things. You might recommend somebody to go there, and they might get a different person, and their experience might be totally different. Well,
Yeah.
report that. But the fact that you are there is a positive also.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think it takes it takes public historians as well being open and willing to hear that feedback and make those changes and those adaptations and work with their within their tours and resources and whatnot. It takes that level of humility and maturity, I think.
You bring up a good point. And I'm complimenting your youth, and I'm not disregarding your degrees, but the fact that there's a younger audience that's more receptive to the complete narrative.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of folks, my age and older, old dogs, and as you know the saying, it's hard to teach old dogs new tricks. But that shouldn't discourage us from straying away from that revisionist history that used to exist that fed those old dogs, because it's a younger audience of people who are coming to these places now, and they want that truth. And this is really playing itself out now because, where I work at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, we've been open up after the pandemic that required us to shut down for about a month or so. Right now folks are starting to come back, and I'm noticing in these people who are coming back, they're a lot younger. And the science is dictating that. Some are still as much uninformed as before, but the fact that I say, and again, I live it, I breathe it. Every time I take one of these groups out, I know that they're younger, but they're, again, their minds are more open to the fact that they want to hear the whole story. They don't want to hear that sugar-coated, watered down. Well, I can't paint everybody with one brush. Some still want to hear that sugar-coated, watered down version of history. But the fact that they're not getting it as often is a testament also.
Mm-hmm. You brought up earlier that you had done Civil War reenactments. Do you still do that? And I'm just interested in how you got into that.
Yeah, I'm still officially a Civil War reenactor. However, that hobby has taken a real blow, especially since Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof is a gentleman who came within miles of where I live, and went into Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and snuffed out 9 lives. Since then, the hobby has taken a big hit. So when I but even before then, I was kind of fading away from the hobby also. But what I do now is, at requests, I'll don the uniform and I'll go give presentations on the African American in the Civil War. It's been years since I've gone on to the battlefield and taken part in a battle reenactment. I don't foresee that happening again in the future. There are still reenactments that are still sporadically done. There are some living history events that are still going on, but that hobby was dying on the vine prior to the coronavirus. So I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side of this. But I do know that because of the fact that I can still don that uniform and do those individual presentations. I'm always willing to do that.
One thing that I've found with the public is that they generally don't always see the difference between, say, an encampment, a reenactment, and living history. So how do you see that differently?
Reenactment, as that is applied to Civil War, because I am considered a Civil War reenactor also, is an imposing force. I'm a Union reenactor. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm a Union reenactor, so we would go to these sites, and at the sites there would be Union reenactors like myself, and there would also be Confederate reenactors. And at some point during the day, we would have a battle, and preferably a historical battle that actually took place. Or in some cases, it's a mock battle, something that we just in our heads create. But at some point we'll clash in the sense that we will we will, to the best of our abilities, use the tactics that would have been used during the period of the Civil War, and we will engage accordingly. We'll have the muskets, the cannons, horses. It depends on the magnitude of how many people we can muster for this event. Living history is just, I could be by myself, and do a living history event, or we can just, do an encampment of sorts, set up a tent and just be available for folks to come by and just ask us questions about what they see, or test our knowledge on the Civil War.
That's helpful, I think, for people to hear. You mentioned Mother Emanuel and the changing in the dynamic of reenactments even before this pandemic, which I think will change sites and museums. But what do you think it is about that particular moment that made a shift in reenactments?
Well, reenactments and reenactors, especially Confederate reenactors, the symbolism. Of course, one of the symbols, is the Confederate flag, which for many African Americans is problematic. You can explain all the history associated with that Confederate flag, all you want, but in the eyes of African Americans, that flag means to them what is been meant in their lifetime, and in the lifetime of African Americans, that flag is associated with hate groups, and that for some is hard to understand. It's hard to fathom. But when Dylann Roof went into that church and did what he did, all of a sudden people got it. Why did it take the loss of 9 lives for state representatives to realize that flag flying on the State House ground was a problem? Because before that, it wasn't. As far as they're concerned, in their eyes, it was not. So, because they realized that it was a problem. They took it away from that spot, and other places all across this nation kind of followed suit based on that. Then that was that changing. That was that defining period of them realizing that that symbol is a hateful symbol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's deep.
This series started because of the pandemic, because of the coronavirus, and there are a lot of historians that are having to interpret and tell a narrative digitally. But when I reached out to you, I had no idea, that just kind of, I feel like the Slave Dwelling Project, how timely what you're doing in your narrative was, even to this past weekend with all of the protests that happened. You were staying in a house this past weekend, weren't you? You were at the Aiken Vet?
Yeah. I was stayed there Friday night, and all the protests went on the next night.
Mm-hmm.
So I missed that by one night. And I joke with my wife. I said I missed that by one night, but she said, if you done it the night of the riots and the looting, it may have helped out with the mosquitoes, because I don't know how mosquitoes do in tear gas. So I guess you got to joke, you got to make jokes when you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I did this past Friday night is with the Historic Charleston Foundation. Historic Charleston Foundation has been great. They do a beautiful job. On my short list of places where, well, actually it's a long list now of places that do the right thing and tell the stories the way they should be told, and respectfully, a complete narrative. Historic Charleston Foundation is on that list, and because they're on that list, and because of all that's been dealt to us with the coronavirus, and us doing things the way we're doing now, a lot of the way we're doing it, you're there and I'm here and we're communicating, and I can see your face. We try to apply that now, to the situation. What science has taken away from us, technology is giving us some of that back. So Historic Charleston Foundation understood, and they understand that, and they allowed me to have access to the site, all alone, all by my lonesome, to that space, and that gave me that opportunity, through Facebook Live, to communicate with an audience and broadcast 4 times. And I haven't compiled all the statistics yet, but I know that first broadcast, last I checked, it had like 5,000 views. That's major. To be, because doing it this way, we're engaging people we would have not otherwise engaged. There are only so many people I can get around a campfire. Yes, that's more interactive, yeah, and I want that. I want that to come back. But in the meantime, we gotta adapt and overcome.
What do you think about when you are sleeping in these slave dwellings? What's going through your mind?
Well, Friday night I was thinking about mosquitoes, but in a more controlled situation where I'm in control and not the mosquitoes. It's you think about that site. You think about the enslaved people at that site. If you have that knowledge, of who those enslaved people are or were, you think about those folks, and how you think about how slavery was applied to them at that place. What opportunities within that system they may have had at that place, and sometimes you compare it to other sites you may have gone to. Where I was Friday night, that's an urban environment. So I was hearing all those noises associated with being in an urban environment.
Right.
I'm glad it wasn't the night after, but hearing the fact that you being encroached upon, but here is a little kind of a historic oasis amongst all this development that's around you. You can look up and and look at into the second, at least the second, third story window of somebody's house, knowing that, you know, that person could be doing likewise, looking in on you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, something else that went through my mind, you know, being as the murder of George Floyd, it was so recent, and Mr. Arbery in New Brunswick, you know, you think about those things, and you think, well, yeah, I got access to this place, but what does law enforcement know of my presence here? Do they know of my presence here? What if something should go awry? You know, I found myself in one time doing one of the lives was, I had this flashlight. I'm shining it up on the building, trying to show the audience in the dark what this building looked like. And I said, well, wait a minute. You might want to just turn this flashlight off, because there are folks out there don't know you're here, and they're seeing a flashlight, you know, on this building. Somebody might call the cops, and some cop might show up not knowing what's going on, and you know how that goes sometimes. So at least in that, again, you think about different things at different places, and that's the thing I was thinking about, you know, that night, because of all this, the reasons we're demonstrating, you know, could have played itself out, you know, in the situation I had put myself in. But other sites, you know, take Magnolia Plantation, for instance. The last two times I stayed there alone. Well, the first time I stayed there alone, you know, I wasn't aware of armadillos, and well, the fact that, you know, they made these lumbering sounds when they came near. You know, they're oblivious to their surroundings and don't care. There's nothing stealthy about them. They just come, and, you know, like a tank coming through, and you hear this noise, and if you don't know what that is, it'll freak you out, and it did. But once I knew, you know, that it was an armadillo, I was more comforted, you know, once I knew what I was dealing with. You know, my next solo sleepover is the Hayward, Washington house. That's where George Washington actually slept when he came to you know, to Charleston, South Carolina. So a lot of my thoughts are going to be with, you know, George Washington, the fact that, yeah, I'm here, I am in the kitchen, and, you know, of course George Washington slept in the big house, but also the fact that you know, the Grimke sisters, you know, those famous abolitionists have some connection to that house also. So that's something that we're going to be able to interpret. And of course, between now and then, I would have done more research on the site, and I will know more about the site. But even with that, you know, I want you know, the experts from the site to, you know, at least be in on the Zoom call that we're going to do, and try also to be in on the you know, the Facebook Live sessions that we're going to do, because, you know, those site managers know a whole lot more about that site than I do. And in getting back to the way we started this conversation, you know, this is probably going to be the wave of the future, certainly the wave of now, and we're taking advantage of it.
So when you just told that first story about this past weekend, I'll be honest, I just had an aha moment. You had said that while you were at the Aiken Rent House this weekend, you know, you have your flashlight and you're out there and you're thinking about, you don't know, like, what if something goes awry, and maybe the cops don't know that you're supposed to be there. And we do know what could potentially happen, and what the assumptions that might be made if an African American man is found on a historic property with a flashlight that they didn't know was supposed to be there. And I think the aha moment for me just now was, like, to be honest, I didn't even think about it from that perspective when you were at Vance. What could have happened, and because I wasn't in the building the entire time, you know, I was in the visitor center for some of the time. And I think that was an aha moment for me, to remind me how important it is to continue to have conversation, to broaden perspective and understanding, Because these are things that I know these things, but I didn't even think about it.
Yeah, and see, that's another thing. You don't have to, but if you look at the history of this nation, again connecting dots here. If you look at the history of this nation, and the fact that it was a threat for Africans from the word go, and
Yeah.
and that has been passed down through our legislations that we create, our ability to have a just and law-abiding nation. We got to take into effect that we got to take into account that a lot of these laws that were written to disenfranchise African Americans, and this Constitution that was adopted was that's a Constitution that had to be amended many times to include people other than those folks who were in that room, those white property owning men. They say, yeah, we the people, but they didn't really mean that. Those guys sitting around that table, because if they did, that Constitution would not have to be amended as such to include the rest of the people that are now that we. So there's that.
Culturally, I haven't been made to. So, we all like gravitate towards what's comfortable, right?
Yeah, there you go. And you're right. You're right. You do need to, but that's not. It's not something that has to stay in the front of your mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. I think it was like, because I could stand outside the Aiken Rent house with a flashlight. So
yeah, and I wouldn't advise it, but still, if you were challenged, if the two of us were challenged individually, apart from each other, your chances of walking away from a situation like that is far greater than mine.
Right. Yeah. Anything else that you want to talk about as far as the slave dwelling project, or
well, we were supposed to do our sixth conference this year at Clemson University in October, but the science dictates that we will not. However, our major funder, 1772 Foundation, has given us the option of letting their financial support carry over into 2021. So we are still talking to Clemson University to make that happen. We're going to figure out, through the science and what's feasible and when it's feasible in 2021. But we still want to do it at Clemson University. So just know that it is going to happen. Most immediately, we're figuring out what we're going to be doing with the sites that we're supposed to be going to physically in July and August. We're in a place right now where August could still possibly happen. Me be coming to these places physically and being there.
Right.
And this me physically being there may mean that it's only me, and that's why we've been experiencing. That's why I'm glad that Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, the Historic Charleston Foundation, the Charleston Museum, the thing that we'll be doing on the 19th, and then at the last Friday of this month, we'll be going to a South Carolina State Park. We'll be going to a plantation in Union, South Carolina, Rose Hill Plantation, and it'll be a solo sleepover there. So we're still remaining relevant. We're doing what we're doing. We're just doing it in a manner that's safe for all. We're maintaining that social distance. We call it social distance learning, so folks can still engage with us.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah. Well, I will definitely keep following. I follow you guys on social media so I can see where you're staying and what you're doing. So, but it has been really, really good talking to you.
And I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the fact that you've had the wherewithal to know that what we're doing right now is relevant. What we need to do right now is important. And I want to commend you also I was real impressed when you did the interpretation that we got there about Mr. Vance, and you didn't hold back, you didn't sugarcoat it, and that's what I like. That's the kind of history I like, and so I want you to keep on doing what you're doing also.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I will let you get back to your day, and I will be back in touch soon. And I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you.
Oh, you take care.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.